cover. And then for those who are here, I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about the pest problems that they've encountered.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that I could cover all of the pests, and so it's better to talk about the ones that people are actually dealing with,
Yeah.
and we can do that.
Okay.
And so
You slide yet?
I did share it. Want me to share again? Let's try again.
You pull that out. There we go.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, and I'm watching the waiting room, and so I see. Oh, Micah's joining us, and I'm sure that as we get to rolling, continue to have some people hop on. But no, I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this. You know, I'd be lying if I told you that if I didn't tell you that I may have forgotten a little bit until a couple days ago, and then I thought, oh yes, that's happening.
I know we've had a big break between the last class and now.
Yeah, but no, I'm excited. I think this will be good. You know, my wife and I, we just moved to a new place, and so I think we're looking at how we can do some things outside and trying to be good stewards of the space we do have. So we're excited about that. But
All
yeah,
right.
if you're ready, Kat, I'm ready to
Okay.
for us to get rolling.
Okay. Well, hi, Micah. I'm happy to see the faces I see, and I'm if anybody is interested in showing their face, we encourage that just because it's more fun to talk to a face than to a blank screen. And I totally understand if you don't, but just if you feel inclined, I encourage you. And then also if you're in a quiet environment, you want to keep your sound on so that you can pipe in with a question. um, we're going to take questions as we go tonight, as long as we can stay on track, because that way we can be a little bit more interactive, which I think is more fun for everybody. My name is Kat Gant, and I am the director of the OKC Harvest program at Oklahoma City Beautiful. OKC Harvest is a school garden support organization. We are, I've got a dog bumping into my desk down here. She's blind. Go. The School Garden Support Organization. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
So we grow gardens in schools, and we're in the midst of changing our models to be more sustainable by providing garden educators. We have an impact grant from Sprouts right now to showcase what we can do with a paid garden educator in a school garden program that comes in and does the maintenance and does weekly lessons. And I mention this just because I think it's important for the community to know that this is going on, and it's something that we want to see sustained over the long term. And I don't know that I've mentioned too much about that garden educator pilot program in these last few videos or last few classes. It's an exciting program that we are seeing amazing results with. It's kind of sad right now with schools being closed that we're not going to be able to get back into the garden with the kids, but we're trying to be creative with this technology that we have here to keep the kids connected to the garden. This garden series is a partnership with the Lynn Institute. So I'll let Anthony, he is with the Lynn Institute, introduce himself and tell you a moment or two about the Lynn Institute, and then we'll jump into our topic.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Kobe. I'm the director of collaboratives and community engagement with the Lynn Institute, and I see a couple familiar names of some partners we have and individuals who work with the Lynn Institute. And to give you a nice, short and sweet kind of snippet of what we do is that the Lynn Institute is a nonprofit organization based here in Oklahoma City, and all of our work is geared around positively affecting and working with vulnerable populations. And some of our biggest work is with the Northeast Oklahoma City community, which is a community who is very underserved in access to resources and other necessary components it is to live a full and healthy life. And so with that, we formed the Healthy Community Collaborative, or excuse me, the Healthy Community Collaborative Northeast Oklahoma City. And that was founded in 2016. And it all stemmed from a research study that was done in 2014. And so that is made up of different community leaders, civic leaders, organization leaders, all geared at starting initiatives and putting forth efforts and programs to try to lift up the Northeast Oklahoma City community. And so if you're interested, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about it. You can shoot me an email tomorrow morning or sometime tomorrow morning, depending on how, I know I've got a 9 o'clock. Sometime tomorrow, you'll get an email with all the information about this class that we're having. And if you have any questions for me, I'd love to get you connected or to get you plugged into what we've got going on. It's a lot of really good work. With that, we've been able to recently do some food distributions in Northeast Oklahoma City, and we're always looking for volunteers. So if that's something you're comfortable with and want to get out and see if you can find a way to serve the community, we'd love to allow these food distributions to be the avenue to do it. So I'm excited. Kat and OKC Beautiful are fantastic. They do such great work. And whenever I mentioned it to them and they said yes, it's one of those things where, you know, I'm the person where I ask people to do things and just go, the worst thing they could do is say no. So whenever she said yes, I was really excited. It's been fantastic. People have really enjoyed this opportunity, as well as myself getting to learn a ton from the expertise of Kat. So Kat, thank you so much. We're excited to continue this partnership, and I'm excited to learn about what you guys got for this evening.
Awesome. And I just want to say, I should have mentioned that Micah and Sarah, raise your hands, guys, are my 2 garden educators. So they are the ones doing all that awesome work in the schools that I mentioned. In the chat box, I just put a link to this document, which is your outline for this class. I do really detailed outlines for each of these class I have done. And it's not for you to necessarily follow along while we're talking, but you can if you want to. But there are links throughout that you can then go and use later if you're interested about any particular piece of what we touch on today. So that link is to a PDF that's on our OKC Beautiful website, and all of the documents are on our website that you're going to see me reference tonight. So if you can find the chat, it's there. Okay, so I'm not sure who has attended the other classes that we've done. I'll just kind of, I'm going to touch on a few things that we've talked about in the past that are really relevant to how you deal with bugs in our gardens here in Central Oklahoma. The bullet topics are listed there. I put them in a little bit different order than what they were on the description of the class, just because of how we're going to talk about them. We're going to really focus on preventative and proactive steps, and I'm going to talk about how to deal with bugs kind of from a mindset perspective, so that you can come away with a sort of a way to think about dealing with bugs first, instead of feeling like you have to remember a list of, you know, products that you need to go out and buy. I think it's much better to have an idea about how to create a healthy system, and that system is going to naturally take care of itself over the long run. So that comes from kind of a mindset approach. And then of course we're going to talk about how you get rid of specific pests without the use of harsh chemicals. And then we'll talk a lot about identifying them. There's a lot of links on that outline I just told you about, to fun resources to geek out about gut bugs if you want to get into it. So just a starting point here. I'm pretty sure most of you who are here are probably already, you know, wanting to avoid chemicals. I just realized that my text is cut off there. It just basically says, you know, with chemicals, you have the potential for environmental and human health dangers. There's something called the pesticide treadmill, which is, it references this thing that occurs when you use these synthetic chemicals to kill insect communities on plants. And that's, the more you use the specific chemical that targets a specific, pest, the more resistance develops within that organism. And so because of the resistance, you then have to up the amount of the pesticide that you put, and then eventually you have to go and toss that one and start over with another one. So you're just constantly increasing your exposure risk by having to increase the amount that you use. And that can happen in a garden too, not just on a large farm. And then the other real problem with using a chemical pesticide is that you're often the ones that people grab for on the shelf at like the big box stores or the garden store will be very what's called broad spectrum. And it'll target a wide range that will include all of your beneficial insects, and it will, when it drips down onto the soil, it's going to kill the microbial life in the soil. And so that kind of is like kicking yourself in the foot, because what we talked about in the Gardening 101, the very first class that we did in the series, is that you really need healthy soil to have healthy plants, and the microbes are what make your soil healthy. So here's a few examples of what is commonly, used around town. I mean, people will just go to the store if they have a bug problem and they'll grab one of these because that's what's available. And so these are the ones that are going to be broad spectrum, and they're going to be detrimental. Also, they're going to, stick around, and if you don't wash your produce, you're going to have, contact with the chemicals, and they're not necessarily good for your health either. They're meant to kill the bugs, and they're not meant to really be ingested. So, so another kind of perspective on chemical pesticides that I don't think a lot of people realize is that, when we go to the grocery store, we are buying a lot of pesticide residues with our fruit and our vegetables. There's an organization called the Environmental Working Group that every year publishes something called the Dirty Dozen, the top 12 pesticides that have residues on them, or have the most of these crops have the most residues of everything that was tested for 2020. So the ones that are listed there were the highest for 2020. And if you read the verbiage there, you can see that, for example, kale showed 18 different pesticide residues. So people are going to the store to buy a superfood, which is kale, which is extremely good for your body, but in the same time, they're ingesting carcinogenic chemicals, which is totally, self-defeating. So I point this out not only to sort of make the case for what we're about to learn about how to do it without the chemicals, but also like if you are going to kind of weigh the cost benefit of your garden and figure out, what do I want to grow in my garden versus buy in the store. If you look at the Dirty Dozen list, it can kind of give you a good starting point. Like, okay, I don't want to buy my strawberries at the store. I think, and strawberries, spinach, kale, all three of those we can grow here. Fruit is a little bit tougher to do. I have fruit trees in my yard, and they're always full of bugs because I don't bother with them. But if you can find a local grower who you can talk to about what they put on it, you'll probably be in better shape. So just a perspective there. So I talked about how we're going to have sort of a mindset approach. So with a natural control plan, you're going to be thinking about it and kind of sort of using your it's sort of the brains versus brawn approach. And two things that you want to keep in mind is that you have to kind of change your expectation for what perfection is. when you're using a natural approach. And then you want to think about, working for the whole plant. You're not just thinking about that perfect thing that you're harvesting. You want to aim for a healthy plant. Here's a beautiful grocery store display of apples. And I put this in here just because they're so shiny, they almost look fake. And the whole point of this is just to raise the point that, perfection can be sort of deceiving. Pest damage on food actually has been shown to produce antioxidants within the produce. So there's actually nothing wrong with some blemishes on your fruit or the leaves of your plants. They actually ends up making your food a little bit healthier. Polyphenols is the specific antioxidant that this study talks about in tomatoes. So you just have to kind of change your threshold for tolerance of damage. And in your backyard garden, I mean, you can just pull off the part that doesn't look good and eat the rest. A little bit of damage is going to be expected. Here's another study that talked about organic food being more rich in vitamins and minerals, higher content of nutritionally significant minerals, and then also higher in heavy metals and higher in nitrates, which is the synthetic nitrogen that you find. So just some more, oops, I think I might have put that slide in twice, unless I'm going backwards. Okay, so the goal is healthy plants. We're gonna be proactive, and we're aim for healthy plants. So I did not realize I had such fancy screen transitions on this PowerPoint. So I'm sure on Zoom they're in slow motion, so I apologize.
Great. It looks great.
Okay. All right. So another little plug here for the approach that I'm presenting, and that we're pushing for healthy plants in Gardening 101 and in Composting 101. We talked about the soil being so important to raising a healthy garden and having a good harvest. And this article talks about that resistance to pests and diseases is directly correlated with the health of the soil. That they've shown that there's like a direct relationship there. When crops are grown in soils that are less fertile, the plants have more pests and disease. So that's what I'm trying to say. We're going to work on our soil, grow healthy plants, and that's going to be like the foundation for you not having to run to the store and buy 7 Dust. So the brains versus the sort of thoughtful approach versus the run out and get what you need. And then hopefully over time you'll save money. And what will happen as you build your natural approach, you're going to be creating this beautiful ecosystem in your garden, because you're not going to be knocking off, you're not going to be killing organisms that are actually going to be helpful to you. And you're going to be building a beautiful biodiversity within your garden ecosystem. And that increases your sustainability. So you'll save money and you'll have a more sustainable system. Here's a diagram that shows something that's called integrated pest management, which is the technical term for what I'm going to be talking about. IPM is used within the agricultural universe as a kind of a bridge between organic farmers and conventional farmers. It's kind of where they all meet in the middle. By having this sliding scale of talking about prevention as the first step, and then kind of using the least toxic methods first, and then progressing towards the toxic methods. And that's kind of used by middle of the road people. There's people there's farmers on, either end of the spectrum. But the more you can stay on the proactive, non-toxic side, the healthier your garden is and the more sustainability you achieve. And I put the little nerd glasses here because this is kind of the way you have to be to take this approach. You kind of have to really get into the details and kind of really enjoy learning lots of stuff about your garden and your plants. So the proactive pest protocol starts with what's called in IPM cultural methods. cultural methods just means like how things that you can do with, manually to do what we're talking about to prevent problems before they start. So build soil health. I put a link there to our Gardening 101 class so you could get the gist of how we build healthy soil. Sanitation, monitoring your plants, identifying pests and keeping notes, doing things to change your environment to discourage pests, different cropping methods, which we also talked about in Gardening 101, how to manage your moisture level and using resistant varieties. These are all cultural methods I'm going to touch on. We won't spend a lot of time on each one, but I just want you to be aware of them. So, and then the gist again is prevention here. So start with, I'm not going to spend time on this again, soil health. I'm pausing here because I was considering asking somebody to raise their hand and tell me what you have to do to build your healthy soil. Go ahead, Micah, I can see it's on the tip of your tongue. What do we do to improve the health of our soil? It's right there on your screen. We add organic matter. So organic matter, we compost, we continually add the remnants of previously living things to our soil to feed the microbes to build up the structure of our soil, increase the microbial life, and increase the fertility. Okay. I just have this fantasy of being in the same room with people. You have to bear with me. Okay, proactive sanitation. This is just common sense stuff. If you're gonna, and when we talk about pest control, it does include disease. So pests are sometimes microscopic viruses and things that cause problem in our plants and in our gardens. So you want to pay attention to keeping your tools clean, and that's something that I'm really bad about, but it's hard to keep up with. But even if you do it once a season, it's better than not doing it at all. When you're buying plants at a nursery or any place, check them out. You're going to pay for pests if you don't check them out. Even at a great store like TLC, sometimes you'll look down and see a bunch of aphids on whatever start you're about to buy. Well, put that puppy down and pick something else because there's no point in bringing that home. And then if you are, pulling things out of your garden and it's unwanted material, don't throw it down and leave it to sort of decompose in the row there. Either put it in your compost or put it in the trash. And that way you can really control the level of disease that you're creating an environment for. I'm going to keep moving because I'm going to end up running out of time. So monitoring, identifying, keeping records is probably my favorite part of gardening. It's just basically casting your own shadow on your plants. And that's what they say, the gardener's shadow is the best fertilizer, because when you see what's going on in your garden, you can do something about it. If you don't spend the time just sitting and looking, a lot is going to be missed. So get a hand lens so you can take a look at things when you see them. Look under the leaves, get down at the ground level, get a good sniff of the dirt and get some mood relief, because they say that's really good for your mood. And then look at what's happening down inside that ecosystem, and you will start to notice things that you can then take action on. I'm going to skip right over these two slides because they're kind of just lists of pests and diseases that you can come across, which you can use all the resources that I provided to go over that. Also, resources here, our extension has a lot of documents that have really nice color pictures of different insects, pests. There's a pest one and a beneficial one, which I've included both of them here, and the link is here if you want to take a look at that or print it. So for example, this is the pest one, and it has nice color pictures, and it's what's cool about it is that these are all pests that are going to be problematic here in our environment. Okay, so there's a database. You can go in and you can even search for pests that like attack people on this digital database here, which is really helpful sometimes, I'm supposing. But you can go in there and you can look up any vegetable, or you can look up a specific bug and hit go, and it'll pull up really good information. And the more you know about the pests that you're dealing with, the better choices you can make. And so this is a field guide. So it talks about pests that actually are problems on some of our commodity crops here in Oklahoma. But it's useful for gardeners because these same bugs are what come into our gardens as well. There's just a lot more detail, so you can really get into it if you want to. And then there's some other national resources that I recommend you check out. And you can look at these on your phone. There's probably apps too. I haven't actually searched and done my research on the best bug identification apps that are out there. I know there must be. I haven't graduated to this century, I guess, in that regard. But they are out there. And but if you're on your computer and you want to look something up, this National Gardening Association Pest Library is great. And then there's some books I actually, if you actually like real live book in your hand, this is a really cute one. Good Bug, Bad Bug. This is a reference book that I love. Garden Insects of North America. And then I think that's the last book I had on there. Yeah. Okay. So when you're being proactive and you're going out and you're monitoring and you're identifying, you can take in information and you can make an informed choice. So as you do that, you're going to come across things you don't know what they are, and you're going to take a picture and try to identify it, ask for help, and then once you figure out, you can do something about it. And this picture has powdery mildew, which we just had a little bit of at one of our gardens. So just to give you an example, okay, powdery mildew, if you go to that database and you just type that in, it'll give you a whole bunch of different options. And hopefully with the tools that I'm going to give you here, you'll be able to figure out which ones are healthy and which ones aren't. Incidentally, on this outline, in the very first section, the very first part, there's a little list of info about pesticides, and there are several databases on I haven't mentioned yet. But if you're interested in certain pesticides that are being used in your environment by people you don't have control over or whatever, you can look those up and you can find out all about them. There's a place called the National Pesticide Information Center, beyondpesticides.org, and other groups like that. Okay, so cultural practices that I mentioned we've gone through now. Change the environment is a really good one, where like if you were growing berries and you were having problems with them, you might want to look around and see if there was like a wild thicket of blackberries in your environment that was bringing in pests. You could change that habitat by removing those wild ones and not having them near your cultivated. Stuff like that can go a long way to eliminating problems. Attracting beneficial insects and installing trap crops is a great way to go if you have space. This little chart here gives you some ideas about how you would figure out what crop you would grow to trap the pests for the crop that you want to protect. And this chart has like 25 different crops to look at. If you click on the link later, you can see a whole bunch of other examples. We talked about this in Gardening 101. These are the cultural practices of cropping methods that are just good, solid ways to build your soil and keep your garden healthy. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but you can reference them back. This is probably the most foundational one for pest control, and that is that you don't grow the same crop in the same spot every year. You want to rotate at least by season. If you're growing year round, you want to have a couple of seasons, meaning like the fall and the spring in between the two times when you grow it. So you just basically are rotating. And even in a small garden, this can make a difference. So you would group your crops by, there's different ways you can group crops. The idea is that you just don't grow the same thing or the same family of things in the same spot year by year. If you can manage the way you water and not constantly stress your plants out with too much or too little water, you're going to have less pest and disease problems, period. So that's just a tip. And we recommend drip irrigation because it helps you target what's needed. I think I need to let my dog out of here. I'm going to tell my husband to come get her. All right, so this is another really great thing. If you buy seeds every season for your garden, check out on the seed catalog websites the different varieties that are available for the crop that you're interested in, and try out some disease resistant ones. So for example, if you had powdery mildew on your squash, look for squash that has a resistance to that. And these are all examples of little codes you'll see on the seed packets for tomatoes, for example. I don't necessarily follow exactly which disease I have. I just look for seeds with the maximum amount of resistances. If I'm not particularly interested in a specific flavor that, you know, tomato, I'll just go for the one that's going to be the most disease resistant. Okay, so we're going to graduate from the proactive preventative stuff and talk about the reactive stuff. So the reactive stuff is, what do you do when you start noticing problems? Okay, you've done all your homework, you're continuously monitoring, identifying, and making informed decisions about what pests you have and what you need to do next. Well, as you're making those decisions, before you get to the sprays, you've got options. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. Does anybody have any questions about the preventative stuff or the cultural methods I mentioned so far? Okay, just chime in if you do. Okay, so mechanical is like literally mechanical. You know, what can I do with my hands to deal with these bugs? And then biological and botanical are going to be tools that you have with these materials, whether they're biological or botanical. And then chemical is going to be your last resort. So, okay, so these are kind of straightforward. Row covers are handy, and we're going to get to a point in this talk where I'm going to actually go through the different pest problems, and we'll touch on which of these methods works for which pest. So basically what I'm doing right now is just introducing the concept of this as a tool for you to have in your tool belt, so to speak. So row covers is totally something you can do in your backyard, even if you don't have a long row like this. You can get wire in a big roll at the big box stores, and you can clip it in half and make hoops, and you can set this kind of row fabric over. They even sell that. I know they sell it at TLC. You can order it online. You can weigh it down with different, you don't have to have fancy sandbags. Not that sandbags are fancy, but they would be. And if you had a garden, they're kind of like the perfect thing for this. But you obviously can use bricks or something else. But row covers are a good option. You can exclude lots of different, flying insects this way. You just have to make sure that they don't come up from the ground initially and get stuck in there. Another barrier option is diatomaceous earth, which is very sharp and cutting to soft-bodied insects. It only works when it is dry, but it is not rendered useless once it's wet. It just has to dry out again before it becomes useful. I'm sorry, that picture's a little blurry, but diatomaceous earth is a good option if you have ants. It's a good option if you have lot of crawling insects that kind of invade. It can be used around your house if you have roaches. You can do it around the perimeter of your house outside. Another idea for barriers would be like sticky things that are like physical deterrent. That tanglefoot stuff is used on trees and shrubs to stop insects from crawling up the trunks. Here's another picture of a smaller scale row cover, which can be also used to extend your season at the end of the summer. We'll talk about that next week with fall gardening, but it can also be used to keep the bugs out. This little mesh box is both a wind barrier, which could be, I don't know how useful that would be here in Oklahoma. Depends on the day. But if you had bunnies or something small and crawling that was coming and trying to get into your garden, that would help. And then if you have cutworms, which are the little caterpillars that come and they saw down your tomato plants, you can just plunge your plant into the ground with a collar around it. And it could be cardboard, it could be an old juice carton or a yogurt container that will stop the cutworms. So stuff like that is in the kind of physical barrier realm. And then my favorite, hand picking. You know, by the time you go mix up a spray, get it all ready, you know, spray it, clean up, you could have probably hand picked most of the bugs that you would have killed by the spray. So I recommend hand picking. Get your kids out there, have them pick them, squish them, smush them. You can put them in a little bowl of soapy water, or you can throw them into the grass for the birds to get, depending on what it is. There are bug vacuums that you can buy. There's all sorts of things you can do if you want to hand pick. Some other mechanical methods, trapping. Get these little pheromone traps. They use these in pantries for the weevils that get into grains. Pheromones attract the insects and then they get stuck on the sticky stuff. It can also be used, these sticky traps are useful to hang in your garden sometimes just to see what you have if you see damage and you can't figure out what it's from. So these other options are more kind of for large scale. If, I don't know, my next door neighbor has one raised bed and he has a torch he uses to kill off pathogens in the soil and weeds, seeds, and stuff like that. So, I mean, they do work. They're very loud. It sounds like a jet is landing next door. I was laughing when I said vacuum, but like, you know, they do exist, bug vacuums. Another really great mechanical method is solarization. So if you ever had like a nematode problem, which is a almost microscopic organism that gets on your roots and causes nodules and knots on your roots and it causes poor growth, you can solarize the soil by heating it up under a clear plastic film, and that will also kill a lot of weeds that get in there and act as pests. That's really the only thing you can do for nutsedge, for example. Okay, so biologicals, this is where we're going to kind of get to a couple of the go-tos that I'm going to recommend, but predatory insects, so biological, obviously living, so beneficial insects fall into this category. A lot of people think that they can release ladybugs into a backyard garden as a way to control aphids, and that ladybugs certainly do, and the more you release them, the more chance you have of them landing and getting your aphids under control. However, they're much more sort of cost effective if they're done inside a greenhouse. Outdoor releases of beneficial insects are kind of not very cost effective because literally they just fly off. So beneficial insects are a much better approach is to plant flowers all around your garden, as many flowers as you can put in, and maybe with a little thought, you know, do a little research about what flowers attract ladybugs, what flowers attract these parasitoid wasps. that kill caterpillars. So there's a whole article about predatory insects here from OSU Extension that I recommend. And then this link here has an article about how to attract beneficial insects with flowers and such. So some fun pictures. This is a parasitoid wasp that is laying its eggs inside the bodies of an aphid grouping. So if you can imagine the little wasp larva hatching inside the aphid, well, that would definitely destroy the aphid. So, and this does go on. It just kind of boggles the mind.
Yeah. Hey.
So, and the same type of parasitoid wasp called a braconid wasp lays eggs on the backs of hornworms, which can really make a mess out of our tomatoes. So I think that's kind of a phenomenal picture. Has anybody ever seen a hornworm in their garden on their tomato plants? About this big. So this is a substantial amount of wasp larvae on top of that.
Whenever I think
hornworm.
if someone asks me to describe a caterpillar, that's literally the perfect image of a caterpillar.
They are so hungry. They will destroy.
They're cool looking.
So there's another thing you can do for the caterpillars, and I'll get to that in just a second. There's another predatory insect that's really common in our part of the world, and that's the lacewings, and they happen to be really pretty too. If you see these, definitely, welcome them. Their eggs are really beautiful. They're like little oval, tiny little white ovals that are attached to the leaf on the end of a tiny hair. I should have put a picture in of what the lacewing eggs look like. I really recommend that you research the eggs of beneficial insects and learn how to identify them, because when you see them in your garden, it's like winning the lottery. It's exciting. So here's a picture of the ladybugs eating the aphids, and a big-eyed bug, which you don't see as often, but they're hard to identify. People just don't see them, but they stick their mouth parts into these soft-bodied aphids, and they suck them, dry. So they're on our side too. So the more diverse your garden ecosystem is, the more flowers you have in abundance, the more beneficial insects you will have. So the biologicals that you can reach for to handle things that I mentioned, the go-tos, are dipel dust and spinosad. These are both bacterial controls that are benign to people and to the majority of the beneficials that are out there. BT, also known as dipel dust or dipel dust, is lethal to all caterpillars. Once the caterpillar ingests it, it kind of destroys their digestive tract. The spinosad is a neurotoxin to quite a number of insects, but it happily doesn't harm the majority of our beneficial insects. It is more broad spectrum than BT, so you have to be careful with it, but it is not as dangerous as a broad spectrum chemical pesticide. So you can kind of research those a little bit further, but here's a picture of a caterpillar that we often see in the fall or the spring eating on a brassica, like a cabbage leaf or a kale. And if it ingests this microscopic bacteria in the BT, it will die. Just a little plug for spiders. You have garden spiders, don't squish them on site. They eat a ton, like literally millions of tons of bugs every year. So they are your allies in the garden. So there's a whole lot of other materials that fall into the category of non-synthetic, they're either botanical or non-synthetic sprays or substances that you can use against pests, and I listed them here. I don't have time to talk about them all, but I do want to tell you, and this is a good spot for me to tell you that I'll put the link right now, I'm going to put the link to this in the chat. And this is a really detailed document that's called Common Garden Pesticide Information. So this has a number of the chemical pesticides that are really commonly used, as well as the ones that I'm mentioning to use that are not so bad. And it ranks them, and it talks about how they work, who they affect, what their oral toxicity rating is, the long-term effects on people, and the toxicity to wildlife. Also the persistency in the environment. So if you're curious about what you have already on hand in your household supply, you can kind of cross-reference with this, and then you use this to make a really informed choice when you go shopping for whatever kind of spray you want to use or what material you want to use. Of the botanicals, which means plant-based, like the oil of a plant, is usually what it refers to. Neem oil is going to be your go-to, and I think I have a slide coming up for that if I didn't skip it already. When you're in doubt and you're looking at products on the shelf at the garden store, you can look for this label. This is the Organic Materials Review Institute. It's a third-party organization that reviews all pesticides and fertilizers and it lists them according to whether they would be allowed in organic farming. So it uses the National Organic Program standards set by the USDA for certified organic. So organic farmers can only use OMRI listed products. And you're not limited as a home gardener, obviously, for that, to that standard. But if you want to have the assurance that what you're using is, used by organic farmers, then you can look for that label. Okay, so this is kind of has sort of is another really sort of quick glance list to help you kind of gauge what's what. The green hearts are things that are very non-toxic, very easy on your garden and your soil and your garden organisms. The orange O's are sort of middle of the road, and then the reds / the no smoking sign. Those are the ones that you want to avoid in an organic garden. And then here are your go-tos. Here's where I had the neem oil. So you don't really need a lot. If you're doing a lot of preventative measures and you're building your soil, you're composting, you don't need a lot. But the things that, if I had to recommend a few things to have on hand, these would be the ones that I would choose. And I have neem oil on hand, but I rarely use it. I can get a lot done with BT and soap, and then the neem oil and the diatomaceous earth come in handy when I have, other problems. And then, we'll talk about the specific bug problems, but this is a visual of this document that I put in the link. And then these slides kind of go into detail about them. You skip through these. Okay, we talked about chemicals as kind of being the last resort. If you do end up using something a little bit more toxic, then you just want to really look at what time of day, what the wind is like, when you're going to use it. You want to think about the bees. Bees are active in the early morning and the evening. So you don't want to be spraying at that time. You want to make sure you protect yourself. And then just go back to the question, why do I have this imbalance in the system in the first place? And try to not use the Band-Aid approach moving forward. Okay, so here's where we're going to jump to questions about specific. I'm going to open up this link here. I'm going to pull this down here. Can you all see that? Okay, so this document is this is linked on our website, so you can go to use this anytime you want. So this is part 1, and then we also have part 2. So if you want to ask if anybody here wants to pipe up and ask me about specific problems that they're dealing with, and then we can talk about those in detail for the last 10 minutes. I'll let you kind of look through those. You maybe don't know what you have. So if you don't know what you have, just tell me. You can either type it in the chat or speak up. And we can go and look at some of the real specifics of how you would deal with that pest.
Maybe a general question I have for you, Kat, is are there any, obviously different from those that we've talked about, maybe some that are a little bit more complex, maybe more common, maybe less common, but really complex and difficult to manage on this list?
Let me think about that for a second. Let's talk about the squash bugs and the squash vine borers because they're really common right now. And I think Barkley mentioned she had a vine borer. It's not that they're necessarily complicated, it's just that they're very tough to deal with. So let me go to let me get rid of this tab and go to part 2 because that's where the squash ones are. So when you get these slides, you can click on these links or you can go directly to our website. Just to open. Okay, actually I think this is all one thing. Oh yeah, it's right here. Okay, so we'll talk about squash bugs because what's complicated about them is that they have this life cycle and they act very different in their different cycles. So when they're little babies, the eggs and the young nymphs, they're much easier to control. You can see I'm putting my cursor right here by the eggs. That's what the eggs look like. If you can go out there and get the eggs when they're still unhatched, this takes a little bit of brushing off with your fingernail. Way easier than coming out here and doing battle with an adult squash bug who's going to spray like this nasty banana smell at you when you try to squish it. So you can kill the eggs and the young nymphs with neem oil on contact, but you cannot kill the adults with pretty much anything. So with the adults, you have to be really clever and start to try to trap them or catch them. And so what people will do is they'll put a tray, they'll put like a board in the garden right near the squash plant that they'll collect under at night, and then in the morning you have to ambush them. So it's they can get really out of hand really fast, and they get just into large numbers. But I want to show you here's the way the eggs look. I think I have a picture here. There's some awful damage. So look for the eggs, get them when they're young, use neem on the babies and the young nymphs, and then make sure that you have rotations going, you're growing healthy plants. Row covers, if you start your squash all in a row like this, or even an area of your garden, you can avoid them up until the plants flower with a row cover. And you don't have to have these little hoops, incidentally. You can just drape the row cover right over the plant, and that'll keep them that'll keep them off initially until they start to come in, until the flowers start to come in. Hand picking works for the little ones, for the eggs. You can use tape. You can actually get the bugs, I guess, with the tape too, but the eggs come off much easier with the tape. There are beneficials that go after squash bugs. If you grow Queen Anne's lace and spirea, that will attract this particular beneficial. So there's the neem. You want to use the neem on the squash bugs when they're in their larval stage. Same, you can use soap on the nymphs. with squash bugs, I've got pyrethrin in here. And so on the scale, that pyrethrin is not a chemical. It is a botanical, but it is a very harsh botanical that you actually have to really be careful you don't expose your skin to. You don't want to breathe it in. So, and it's very toxic to bees. You don't want cats getting a sniff of it. So you have to be careful with it. It doesn't last long in the environment, but it will kill. It's the only thing that will probably kill those adults on contact. If you're gonna ambush them, you got go in and ambush them with your pyrethrin. This one is mixed with soap. Let's see. This is an old timer squash bug spray, and I honestly haven't ever used it, but I've heard that it works really well. So you could try this. It's Dawn soap, hydrogen peroxide, orange oil, some 70% alcohol, and water. And this is for the adult squash bugs. So your plan for your squash bugs is plenty of compost at planting, row covers until the flowers form. And the reason you can't have the row covers on after the flowers form is because you won't get pollination and you won't get fruit with that cover on. So you unfortunately have to take it off. So use your neem and your insecticidal soap every week. Hand pick the adults and larvae into a bucket. Use the duct tape to remove the eggs. And then if you have to, spray those adults with the pyrethrin. And then the vine borers, they are much more likely, although it sounds like Barkley, you had them on a summer squash. Vine borers are these kind of interesting looking moth type. They're not really moths, but they're kind of the size, and their wings are black and shiny. And they're much smaller wings than a moth would be, but they're kind of oblong, and the size of that. These are the adults. They come around, the females come around and they deposit their eggs that look like those specks on the stems. Sarah has been, she's been on vine borer duty for the last month, and I think she's totally over it. But what happens is if you don't get those eggs in time, a little caterpillar will hatch where that egg is, and it'll burrow into the vine, and literally like just eat a hole into the vine and kind of destroy the vine, and then it pupates and turns into an adult and flies off. The problem with those is that they're really hard to find, and the eggs can be laid in large numbers, so you kind of have to daily go in and look for the eggs. What we did is we sprayed BT because they're a caterpillar, and that strain of bacteria will kill these caterpillars. We would spray BT anywhere on the vines that we think the eggs would be, so that when the larva would emerge and they start nibbling, they would ingest BT. And I think it's worked pretty well. We have had very minimal damage. It's just taken a lot of stewardship on Sarah's part at that garden. So if you do find a little invaded, is this what you had, Barkley?
Yes, yeah.
What you had. So if you find one, you can go in there and you can spray BT right in that area, and it'll eat it and die, or you can just like literally pull it out. Some people will take like an X-Acto knife and slit the stem and actually like surgically remove it. And you can do that. And then a lot of times if you bury the soil around, you bury the vine with soil as close to the ground, the squash vines can actually heal. So if it's not too close to the area where it emerges out of the soil, then you can get back past it.
Would you say that like heavily mulching like we've done at the boating garden with just like the leaves and stuff is going to have a similar effect, or would it need to be like specifically like buried in the soil?
I think mulch works just as well. Yeah, if you can kind of hide that vulnerable like growth point where it comes up out of the ground with soil or mulch, you're going to protect the most vulnerable part of the plant from invasion from a vine borer. And then if you see them flying around, they're hard to catch. Like you really can't swat these. I've tried. It's really hard to catch them, so it's better just to be proactive with the eggs and the BT on your plants. And then Sarah can attest to this. Females may lay 150 to 200 eggs. So she's shaking her head. So yeah. So there's the nasty vine borer, and then it kind of, this is what happens. You see this kind of sawdust. That's its frass, its poop. That it's sort of, it's the color of the inside of the stem, and it kind of kills the stem. This is what you see. You see these little awful looking holes. So here's a really great thing if you want to be really proactive, is get some beneficial nematodes and spray them. Beneficial nematodes can actually get get the part of this life cycle of these vine borers and squash bugs that overwinter in the soil, and they will be the larvae that live in the soil can be nibbled on by these nematodes, and you can order these online. TLC used to carry them. I don't know that they do anymore, but I don't have time to really go into it, but something to look at. And then again, the row covers for squash vine borers. There's a really good picture of the eggs. Soap smothers the eggs too. If you don't want to use BT, you can use spinosad. Get in there with a knife and cut them out. And there's your vine borer plan. So I really want you guys to use this PDF, the part 1 and part 2, because if you figure out what you have, you can go in here and get a lot of detail, step by step, how to identify the life cycle, figure them out, and do what you need to do to get them. So are there any last questions? I know I've gone over.
I feel like you've given me a lot of resources because I can't think of a ton of questions off the top of my head, but like I feel equipped with all of these links and documents.
That's my goal, because you can't really get very far in 45 minutes to an hour on any of this. So I guess what I want to do is show you this page on our website. Let me pull this down here. You go to OKC, oops. I want to log in there. You go to okcbeautiful.com. and you go to programs and you scroll down to OKC Harvest, and then you click on 2020 gardening resources. Here is our class series page. So all of the videos from each of these classes is linked with the class outline and resource links, and then the class slides. So if we go down to today, we'll link in the video of tonight, and then we'll put, I've got all of the different documents that I've referenced in here, and actually one or two that I didn't mention. So those slides that have all the answers to your questions are on part 1 and part 2. So there you have it. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And the next class is a week from tonight, and it's going to be how to start your fall garden.
Kat, thank you so much. Thank all of you for being on. I always learn so much. I feel like every week or every time we have these, at the end I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I watch over the next week or so, I'll have a conversation with someone and say something from this class, and they'll think I'm smart, but really I just got the information directly from you tonight.
Cool. I just saw there was a question about grasshoppers. And there is a specific control for grasshoppers, but you have to be really proactive at the beginning of the season. The name of it is, I can see it, but I can't, I'm not thinking of the name of it. So Pam, if you want to email me your question, I'll try to get you the information about grasshopper control.
Okay. And I have used a product that I got at TLC, and I can't think, I have it inside. I can't think of the name of it right now. And it's supposed to only get grasshoppers and nothing else. And it looks a little bit like wheat germ.
Okay, that's what it is. Have you had any luck with it?
Well, I guess I can't say for sure that, I mean, maybe it would be a lot worse without it. But every year the last like 4 or 5 years, I've had a lot of grasshoppers. I mean, they just eat up everything.
Well, what I will say is that with that material, I know you have to start at the beginning, like way before they hatch and start visiting your garden. You have to apply that.
Okay, so
So
I'll have to make sure that I do it because maybe I don't get it in time because I start seeing them when they're really small, and usually that's when I start
think it's-
using it.
I
But
think
maybe
it's-
I use it before I even see the grasshoppers.
Yes, I think it has to be. I think it affects them when they're like in their larval stage.
Okay. I did ask, maybe at the farmer's market at OSU. Okay, see, I saw Leah Woods, and I did ask her. I'm always asking, oh, what can you do for grasshoppers? And she said she used this too, but she did say that she used it for a while and it helped, and then she stopped using it and she had a grasshopper problem again. So that it seems to be cumulative, but I mean, I have used it for a few years now. So
Well,
I
I'm
don't
sorry.
know.
It's probably the one thing I don't have on here is grasshopper control. So I'll have to add that in, and we'll send it to everybody.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And I
you're
appreciate the
welcome.
class. You're
Yeah, Kat.
always get a lot of information.
Thank you guys again. I really appreciate you guys for tuning in.
Yeah.
Bye.
You guys.
We'll tune in for the next class. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you guys in a week.
See you guys.
Hey.
Okay, bye.
Bye.